Everybody hear me well? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, Haniel.
Awesome, perfect. All right, so yeah, thank you. Thanks again for the intro. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So today I'm going to be talking about developing enterprise level multilingual Power App applications for organizations. So this is something that based out of Canada. So it's very common to have companies that I'm dealing with that are truly multilingual, right? So in Canada we have 2 primary languages, and then if you're in the US you have English and Spanish. Depending on where you are, there may be lots more. So that's the reason for this talk. So a little bit about myself. I'm associate director for Croitoru, a global consulting firm. I'm acting as an enterprise architect with a large focus on the Power Platform. I'm one of the global leads on the Power Platform practice. Before that, I've spent a lot of time in the SharePoint space, Microsoft Teams, and I've been in it about 20 years now in the Microsoft space. I'm very passionate, and my motto in life is to simplify things and automate. Some people can argue I'm just lazy, and that's why I want to automate everything, and that's totally fine. So a bit more. So I'm a Microsoft MVP 6 times. In the last 2 years, I've been again focusing very heavily on the business applications and the Power Platform. I do a lot of these type of sessions. I speak a lot. If you see me on social media, please reach out anytime. A few years ago, I published a book on Agile Office 365. So if you're kind of more in the PMing space and you're looking at ways to leverage Microsoft 365 for your projects, I would say check out the book. And I'm going to share my contact info again towards the end of the sessions if you want to connect. Okay, so we're talking multilingual. What's the big deal? Why is it a hot topic? So the reality is that you may be based out of the US somewhere or wherever you are, and you're working in a specific company. You have your specific needs. Over time, maybe there's another acquisition or a merger, or there's some additional needs that are coming up for certain regulatory reasons. You're told, what, you have to provide your content in multiple languages. In Canada, if you're in Quebec, everything must be French first. The rest of Canada, except for one province, it's English, English mainly, and then one province institutes that you need to do both, right? So again, your needs may be different. And if somebody were to say, okay, you've got your Power Apps, you don't need to add them to a second language, not a huge deal. But what may happen over time is you do more mergers and more acquisitions, and more things are changing. And before you know it, what used to be 5 or 10 applications are now being multiplied by as many as countries or languages you need just to provide your app in that specific language. And so I say none of that. It doesn't make sense. So what are some of the considerations when you're looking at a multilingual architecture? And by the way, we are a small group on this call. I think there's only less than 10 of us. So if people have questions, feel free to come off mute, ask a question. I'm actually, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not monitoring the Teams chat. So if you do have a question that pertains to what I'm doing, please feel free to ask. So the first consideration is simplifying management, okay? So over time, some of the terminology may be changing. For example, you may have regulatory coming and saying, you used to say this piece of text, we want to change it. Rather than having to open up all the applications, change the text, and then republish them, that takes a long time. It would be easier to just have that information stored in one place. Or for example, let's say they used to say okay and cancel on all of your buttons, and you want to change it to yes and no. Imagine you have those in hundreds of places. So it makes it a lot easier if you just centralize it in one place. Reducing development time. Again, this is build once, use many. So if you have the same application exactly that is being used in multiple countries, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to build the same thing twice just to support a different language. What would be much easier is for the application to be smart enough and say, what language do I need to display, and based on that, provide the text. Promote expandability. So I showed you that map of the world before. Let's say we build it for English and we had French or Spanish as a second language. if all of a sudden you need to add a third language into your application, it should be as simple as add the necessary language tags, and that's it, you're done. You don't need to do anything else at all. That will be the best scenario. Abstracting code from content. So in today's demo and in today's architecture, I'm actually using SharePoint as my data repository, my language repository. And the reason for that is two reasons, actually. The first reason is it's a standard connector. So if you're dealing with the Power Platform, if you're familiar with licensing, if you were to use SQL or Dataverse or other types of data stores, those are premium connectors which would force every user of the app to get a premium license. If you're using SharePoint, on the other hand, it's a standard connector. You don't need to use a premium license if your app doesn't already necessitate it, okay? The other reason is I typically like to segregate the code, the application itself, from the content. The code may be built by your citizen developers or your IT department, but then the content, the text, that may be built by communications or marketing or somebody else who's, let's face it, better at writing English than developers often are. And so keeping them apart and having the data store in SharePoint is actually a good idea, because a lot of users today who are working in SharePoint already are familiar with the general usage. So if you tell them, hey, go to this one list and this is where we manage all of our application tags, it's easy for somebody to go in, as opposed to teaching them about Dataverse or writing SQL commands to update certain tags. And then creating consistency. So I gave the example before about the yes/no labels or buttons. So if you're building 10 applications of the same language, ideally, if they're using the same functionality for some of them, it should say the same text. So if it's going to say okay, it should say okay across all the different applications. If it's okay with a uppercase O and lowercase k, let it be the same. It also makes it easier later on when you're creating documentation for your applications, that it's going to have a consistency. So those are some of the key drivers for having this kind of a multilingual architecture. Okay. So what is the high-level design of the architecture? So here's a little spoiler alert. It's actually really straightforward, and I will be really surprised if you're going to take the whole 90 minutes to build it, because you'll see very soon how easy it is. So we're going to have two lists available to us. One list is going to be just the basic strings. So when you have a label, a single value, that's where I'm going to be using my strings library, or list, I should say. And then there's going to be another list where I'm going to store a collection of values. So for example, if I'm using a list, a drop-down list or a combo list, and I want to be able to provide multiple values, I'm going to be using another list for my lists, a list of lists. Now, I'm going to build an app. The app is going to connect to those two lists. Those are going to be the data sources for my labels. And then the nice thing is, if I build a second app, guess what? It's going to leverage the same two lists, right? So this is where I'm creating consistency. And then I can build as many apps as I want, and it's going to use consistent labels. So this is going to give you an idea of, with multiple apps, creating the consistency. Now, let's actually look at how we go and build it from the ground up, basically with nothing built already. So while I switch over, I don't know if there's any questions to begin with. If there are, this is a good time to bring them up. No questions? Okay. So I'm going to open up PowerApps, and I'm going to build a brand new app. And I'm going to make it let's make it a tablet app and call it my request form. Okay. It's going to open up. Don't care about any of this. All right. So let's just keep it really simple. I'm going to request for first name, last name, number of days, and let's say I'm going to do a drop down for my manager. and that's going to be a list of individuals. So I'm going to start by just putting a couple of labels here. And let's insert a text input. Okay. So this one is my first name. This one is my last name. Now, normally I would be doing a much better job at naming my variables, but we'll look at that soon. Number of days. Okay. And we don't need all this text here. Okay. This one is going to be a number. And I said I wanted a manager. So manager, if I could spell, that would be good. And I will use a drop down. Okay. And my items are nothing. Okay, let's see the drop down sample. And I got my numbers 1, 2, 3. Okay. So technically speaking, if I were to now save it and publish it, I have built a very simple app. It works. I can see all of my labels. They're in English. No concern there, right? If I wanted to say, or let's say marketing came to me and say, hey, we got to build the same app in Spanish now. What I would need to do at this moment is make a copy of the app, go into every single label, and change the text. Not what I want to do. Remember my motto in life. I am lazy. I want to have things done as easily as possible for me. So what do I need to do? Well, the first thing I need to do is actually identify each label. So rather than using the out-of-the-box label 1, label 2, label 2.1, I'm actually going to give them some more meaningful names. So I'm going to call this one LBL first name. And this one is going to be LBL last name. Then I'm going to call this one LBL number of days and LBL manager. Okay. Nothing has changed so far in the application besides the internal names of the labels that I have given. Now, here's where things are going to start getting a little bit interesting. Rather than displaying the text, actually, let's first go and build a list here. So I'm going to go to SharePoint now, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new list. Let me blank. I'm going to call this vacation request PR strings. Now, in my list of strings, there are a few things you want to consider. The first one is, what is the actual application I'm using it for? Because what if I'm building 5 or 6 different applications? In theory, I could have a separate SharePoint list for every application. Nothing wrong with that. Or I can build a single list for all my strings. What you want to think about though is, how many labels are you going to have? Because of management reasons, and how do you want to organize it? If you're going to have a lot of different labels, and I'm talking thousands of different labels, it is probably better to separate them into multiple lists. And you may want to have one list for all of your common labels, like the yes, no, okay, cancel, and then have an app-specific list for labels that are unique to a specific application. If you have smaller number of labels, it might make sense to keep it a single list. Also, if you have a lot of them, you got to think about the limits. By default, in a Power App, you've got 500 items per collection, up to 2,000. If you have a collection over 2,000 labels in an app, I would probably advise you to break out that app into smaller apps, because that sounds like a lot of labels you're loading. So for today's example, I'm going to go with just a single list for my strings. And so I'm going to use my title field. I'm going to rename this one to app name. And then there are 3 pieces of information that I need to track. One of them is label name. The next one is label value. And then the last one is going to be my language. Okay. So the app name, that's pretty obvious. The label name, that's going to tell me what value, what label am I actually trying to change the label for. The value is going to be the value that it should be displaying. And the language is a language that I'm working in. So I'm going to go to my app. And what I'm going to do now is I have to move this a little bit just because my screen's cut off. That's perfect. All right. So now I can see my data sources. I'm going to add SharePoint. And I'm going to go to my Power Platform site, and I'm going to pick my VR strings. Connect to it. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is, since we're going to be updating the list, I'm just going to add a small button in here for now that says, call this refresh. And this will be VR strings. Okay. So every time I'm going to hit the button, what it's going to do is it's going to load the list of strings. Now, I don't need my entire list. I only need a subset of my strings, only what based on specific rules. So in this particular case, I only want the strings that apply to this particular app. So what I'm going to do is, rather than just doing a refresh, I'm going to do refresh, and then I'm going to do clear select. Let's call this VR. Let's call this app strings collection, and this is going to be VR strings. And soon I'm going to be changing that. Actually, let's do it right now. Filter where title equals VR. What did I call this? Addition request form. Okay. So now if I try to run it, I'm going to have nothing actually listed in my application because, oh, sorry, nothing in my collection because I haven't actually put anything into my list yet. So if I look over here, I have my app collection, app string collection, it's empty. So where do these labels actually pick up their information? Actually, just going to take off my jacket. It's getting a little hot in here. Okay. So what I actually want to do is I want to go to my app collection app strings collection, and I want to get a specific label that belongs to LBL first name. So I'm going to say my text for value text rather than first name. It's going to be lookup app string collection, and then I'm going to say that label name is equal to LBL first name, and I want the label value. Okay. And what did I get here? I get nothing. The reason I get nothing is because there's nothing in my list. Okay. Now, if I were to go in here, if I'm going to say, you know what, let me do this here. We are form LBL first name. My first name. I'm going to exit. Okay, so I get an entry here. I'm going to hit the refresh button. Look what just happened. So the refresh basically said, go and fetch all the items from my collection or from my list that have the app name equal to VR form. And so you can see how I have this single entry in here. Now let's go back here. I'm going to steal this code. I'm going to say, I'm going to do here, oops, label name. This one is going to be last name. This one is going to be number of days. And then this one is going to be manager. Okay, so you may say this is all good, but it doesn't work. So, okay, I'm gonna go in my list. I'm gonna add the additional values now. So LBL last name. And give it a word line because you already know what it does. So this one here, and I can go VR form LBL num days, and let's do the VR form LBL manager. Okay, and I'm going to save my list, and I'm going to go back to my Power App. And if I refresh it, okay, you can see the information coming in here. What would happen if rather than form this one here, so it actually was, and rather than last name, if I do last names by mistake, right? So I made a misspelling or it's not there. And last name, okay. So this is supposed to, oops. I'm gonna start. String. Oh, that's wrong place. to start. Okay, so you can see it doesn't give all the information. If I do a refresh though, brings in all the values, but it's, oh, that's why I didn't save it. Okay, there we go. So if I go in here, last name is gone. And the reason that it's gone is when you go to my SharePoint list, you'll notice that instead of last name, I actually purposely typed it as last names with an S. So how do you deal with that? So the way that you would do it on the app is rather than just taking the label, there is a function called coalesce, okay? And the way what coalesce does is it says, okay, you're going to give it a number of parameters, one or more. And what it's going to do, it's going to evaluate every single parameter. It's going to try the first one. If it is a value, non-null value, it's going to return it. If it is null or empty, it's going to go to the next one. And it's going to reevaluate, same thing. And it's going to keep going and going and going until it finds something that is not empty or not null. So the reason that I'm using coalesce here is to say that I'm expecting a label that is going to have the word first name. If I don't find it, I'm going to display the actual name of the label that I want to use. So I'm going to use LBL first name. In here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say coalesce, LBL last name, etc., etc. Let's just do one more here. Coalesce, LBL, number of days, and coalesce. Okay, so what you can see now is all the labels are displaying a value. The only difference is that first name, number of days, and the manager are displaying the actual values that I'm expecting. The second one, the last name, is not displaying the value I'm expecting. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give me a hint to say, yo, the LBL last name label does not appear in the list. It is missing. So now I can go to my SharePoint list and I can look and say, oh yes, you're right, there is no LBL last name, I have made an error. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to remove the S, and I'm going to save it again. And now if I go back to my app, I'm going to refresh my list, and bang, now I've got my last name. Pretty straightforward. So everything that I've been showing you so far doesn't really touch on the multilingual. It just gives you an idea of how you can manage your labels coming from a SharePoint list. Okay. And it is, again, it's very reusable. I can use the same label for different buttons. Let's say there's another form or another page where I need to use first name, last name. I don't have to start defining all these labels in different places. Even if the actual name of the label may not be LBL first name, because you can only have the same label once in the entire application, the reference to the label will still be the same. So in other words, if I'm looking up LBL label in my lookup, it will always be the same one. Okay. Let's switch over to a list of items. So I'm going to build something similar here. I'm going to create a new list. So I'm going to say create list. I'm going to call this we are managers. And I'm going to have again, I'm going to call this my, sorry, call settings. I'm going to call this name. And then we're going to have call this the list name. It can be label name, but it's not really a label, it's a list. And then label value. And then to make things interesting, I can even go as far as to say, what is the order? So I may not want them to appear in the alphabetic order. I may want to set the order. So I can say, okay, I'm going to make this a number, and I'm going to call this order. And I want there to be no decimals. And at the end, we're going to do language in a bit. So let's create my managers. So very, oops, actually, sorry. Very early. And the app is going to be VR form. My list name is called BL manager. It's managers in this case. Next meta table, it's a list, LST. Okay. And let's say right now it's 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So just like I created the list of managers, just like I created the labels here statically from the SharePoint list, I've imported them. I'm going to do the same thing in here. So the first thing I have to do is I'm going to go to my data sources. I'm going to say I'm going to add. Whoops. So SharePoint. And I'm going to go to my VR managers. Should be probably more VR lists, but that's okay. And now if I do a refresh, do same thing as I did before. VR managers. Collect, call this list collection, and this is going to be VR managers. Okay, so same idea where I'm doing a refresh. I'm going to be loading all of my my list entries into the app lists collection. So I'm going to run that one quickly here. And so here for my items, what I'm now doing is I'm going to do the filter my app list collection, where list name equals, and let's call this LBL, no, LST managers. Okay. That. And then I want to display the, okay. And you can see Larry, Curly, and Mo coming directly from my SharePoint list. Remember a moment ago, I told you that I have my order. And I say, you know what, maybe I want to change the order. So what I can say, I can do filter, I can do sort by column. And this is going to be order. Okay. So Larry, Curly, and Mo, if I now go in here and I say, you know what, I want Curly to be number 1. And I want Mo to be number 2. And then Larry is number 3. And I save it. Go back to my app, we run it. And you can see how the order has changed. Okay, so we know how to load labels and create dynamic labels in our application from a list. We know how to do the same thing on, labels on from a list, and then we also know how to create a collection or load a collection from a SharePoint list and populate a collection inside of SharePoint. Okay, now let's add the language piece. And again, this is where you're going to find it's going to be really, really straightforward. So I'm going to add the Office 365 connector. Whoops, Office 365. There it is, users. And that's the one that I want. And the reason that is, I need a specific value from you. So my premise is that what are you basing the language off? In most cases, the users are going to be working in a certain language based on their setting in Microsoft 365. So it may not depend on the browser, and it doesn't depend on where they're located. It's actually depending on what they're doing within Office 365. So I'm actually going to leverage the Microsoft 365 language setting. Okay. So I'm going to save this. Just going to see what the formula here is. Expected column value. Oh. That's good. There we go. Error. It's always good to make sure there's no errors. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, when I do a refresh, go here, I'm going to say set by language equals Office users, my profile, preferred language. Okay. Oh, it's syntax. Okay. So if I run this, if I look at my variables now, my language is ENUS. Now, some people may care about the locale. So language is broken down into two sections. One of them is the language, and the second one is the locale. And it's typically broken down by 2 letters, hyphen, and another 2 letters. So in here, the language is English, hyphen, and the locale is US. For my particular application, I don't so much care about what locale I'm in. So if it's English, it's US, Canada, Australia, UK, I don't care. I'm going to use the same labels. If you want, you can actually create different labels based on the locale. That's completely up to you. But for the purpose of my demo, I actually want to keep it as just the first 2 letters. So I'm going to actually go in here. I'm going to say, take the language. I'm going to say left, comma 2, and that is my locale. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this, and just for fun, I'm going to say my language is, and this is going to be my language. Okay, so my language is EN. Now, let's look at what happens if I go and change my language. So I'm going to go to my Office 365. So when you come into your settings, and you go into place count, I always get those two wrong. And I go into my settings. Language preferences. So you see right now it's set to English US. Preferred language is Spanish. There's a whole bunch I used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my display language. I'm going to change it. And I'm going to change it to German. Say select. Update. Now everything is going to change to German. It's going to log me out, log me back in. So that takes usually a couple of seconds. Okay, so now if I look at my my information, it's German. So I'm going to go to my PowerApp. I'm going to run it. And over here, you'll see it change from EN, which is English, to DE, which in German means Deutsch, German. Okay, so far nothing has changed, but here's where the kicker is. I'm actually going to go into my SharePoint lists. And if you remember, I was using the two first letters of my preferred language, which is the language itself. And I'm going to actually modify my strings. I'm going to say this one is EN, EN, and save that. And I'm going to do the same thing for my list. Okay. Now in the app, what I need to do is I need to say, I need to look up where label equals that label and language equals let me spell something here. Not liking my label. Language. Okay, let's see. Change that here. All right, let's do this for simplicity. Bang. I think I've used an internal setting and it's confusing the system. So let's delete this one. That's okay, I'm just going to leave it for now. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Thing. And all right. Refresh. Now there should be no question. Not ordered. Okay. robots are not happy with me today. I think I know why it's not actually doing a refresh. Because there was a bug before. Okay, so collections, language. Just making sure that all the values are here. This is fine. And this is fine, okay. So let's go back. Check it one more time. So we do have the language here. And I don't see the other language attribute. Okay. So label equals first name and language equals. Okay, perfect. So now what I gotta do is I gotta do the same, adding the language tag to my other labels. So I'm going to do that in here. Here. And here. And then one more place I have to do is actually my list. Because I want to make sure I'm only getting the names of the people for my specific. In this case, the name of people may not be relevant, but if you have something like favorite color, it would make a difference, or maybe actually for region. So filter. Oh, too many columns. It looks good. Filter. All right. So as you can see, my list is empty. Everything is basically not broken, but there's nothing there. So I'm going to go back to my account. I'm going to switch back to English. And let's go to United Kingdom, just to prove the point that it doesn't matter which English-speaking country I'm in, it's all good. It's going to log me out. It's going to log me back in. Okay, I'm going to go to my Power App. I'm going to hit refresh. Boom, everything's back. And you can see I have my English label now. So let's say I want to do German. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to take all these values. I'm going to take both of the languages, so I don't know which one is actually picking up right now. But this is all German, and here I'll just say Wilhelm, Thomas, Peter, and let's save that. Oops, fix. What's it complaining about? problems. What is your problem? Actually, this one. Save. I'm actually just going to put 2 of them for the manager, so it doesn't even have to be the same number. And let's go to the strings. And yes, okay. So these are the labels. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So now let's see what happens if I go back to German. So if I have to go over here, go back switching to my language. Deutsch, Germany. Okay, so you can see already the beauty of how easy it is, because now I basically, once my form was done, I've defined my list and my labels and how they're going to be used. And it's at this point, it's just managing my lists in SharePoint. If I wanted to add, and I'll show you in a minute, we do a merger, we bring in another company from another country. It's literally as simple as just adding the language tags and we're done. So you can see over here, I have all my tags, I have different entries in my lists, right? Pretty straightforward. Come on, let's see some thumbs up and clapping hands if you like this, if you find that it's easy. So this is basically the architecture that I've built. One thing, and I've had this question asked before, is what if I'm using, different types of language text that is non-Latin? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and I'm going to add some more values. And let me do this. Pick the same form. Put them down here. And let's have some fun. So what was this? Okay. And let's save that. Why is this the first one? Okay. Fix. What's going on with the demons today? Like me. That is saved. So now Okay. So I've got my tags, and if I go to my managers, same idea. Let's take 3. Copy that over here. 1, 2. Actually, it doesn't have to be chronological, which is fun. And then this is HE. So now I've got my data. Let's say we merge with a company in Israel. We need to support them as well. So now all I have to do is go into my settings. I'm going to switch to Hebrew. Now this is a right to left language. So it works. The whole architecture is no different. But what you could do is actually extend it to say that instead of just changing the labels, you may actually want to change the position of the labels and the associated text fields so that left to right and right to left doesn't really matter. So just going to let this do its thing, then go over here. I'm going to hit refresh one more time. And there you have it. All the labels, all the list items, everything in Hebrew. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly change this back. Push and States. All right. So I promised you, and I gave you a heads up that this is really straightforward architecture, something that you can easily implement in your organization. And we got it done in, I believe, less than, yes, we got it done in 1 hour roughly. So I'm going to open it up now to questions. I know we have, a bit of time, but I'm going to open up the floor if anybody wants to, bring up any questions or anything else. One thing I will say though is while you're always loading from lists, if you're going to be using an app in a mobile device and you're using the PowerApp player, there is a storage that comes with the player on a tablet or a mobile device. And so what you can actually do is during load time, you can load all these strings and items into a collection in memory in your cache. And then when you load up the app, rather than loading all the lists from scratch, what you can do is just do a quick check to say, when was the last time that that list was modified, and compare it to the last time that you have loaded the list into the app. If the change is more recent, it means that some of your data may be outdated, load it all in. But if you find that the most recent item on the SharePoint list is the same time that you've done your update or before, you know that the cache inside of your application is more recent, so you don't have to hit the server to get all the stuff. You just get it directly from the application cache. So now I'm going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, so Mark's got a question. Mark, I don't know if you want to come off mute and just ask, or excuse me, Joseph Marks. If you want to just come off mute and ask that directly. Nope. Okay.
Hi there.
there you go.
I have a question. So for the page with Bo and the other stooges, is the order column required to be strictly unique, like 1, 2, 3? Because toward the end, when there were more names added, it looked like one was repeated and so forth.
Correct. So, so the answer is within a language, you want it to be unique because when you're loading the list into the app, so if I go back to my app and I go to my list, I'm first of all, actually it's right over here. So when I'm loading my list, I'm saying, first of all, filter based on the form. And I should actually really be filtering on my language as well here. Yeah, I could actually be filtering this one for language as well. I should have done this here, actually, the filtering on the language, so that you already know that you're getting just the one language. That's a miss on my part. But to answer your question, it should only be unique within the same language, because let's say you're going to have Larry 3, Curly 1, Mo 1. Which is going to be first? Is it Curly or is it Mo? Right, so it may be indeterminate. But having the same numbers repeated across languages is not an issue. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? More questions? Okay. Anything posted on the chat? Oh, I see a few. No, I don't see any other questions. Okay.
Yeah, I think Joseph asked the one question that was in the chat.
I see. Okay. So I know it was a bit shorter than what you may have thought, but I like to keep things simple. I don't like to overcomplicate something that shouldn't be. So again, my contact information, if you want to reach out, if you have any other questions about this architecture or other things you would like to discuss regarding our platform, please feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for
Alrighty.
everyone who joined. As I stated earlier, these recordings will be available on our YouTube page, hopefully sometime next week, whenever we can get them edited and clipped. Haniel, again, always thank you for your support of the user group and your time speaking here and presenting to us today.
Anytime, my pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.